The first thing I saw was blood on Claire Whitmore's white sleeve, and the second was the way she folded against my front door as if whatever had happened to her had finally broken the last strong place inside her. It was barely 3 in the afternoon, sunlight pouring across the apartment hallway, yet she looked as though she had stumbled out of the darkest hour of her life. Her mascara had run in gray rivers down her cheeks, one heel was missing, and her breath came in frightened, uneven gasps. When I caught her before she hit the floor, she gripped my shirt with both hands and sobbed so violently that I thought someone had died. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, because sometimes the person quietly standing beside us is the one our heart has been trying to find all along. That my name is Nolan Pierce, and for nearly 2 years Claire had lived across the hall from me in a modest brick apartment building in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland, Maine. We had become the kind of neighbors who knew each other's routines without ever admitting how closely we paid attention. I knew she left for work at 7:30 each morning with coffee in a blue travel mug. She knew I spent most weekdays restoring antique furniture in the workshop behind my uncle's shop. I carried her grocery bags when the handles cut into her fingers, fixed the chain on her bicycle, watered her plants when she visited her mother, and once sat on the hallway floor with her for an hour when a thunderstorm knocked out the power and reminded her of the car accident that had taken her younger brother. She brought me soup when I had the flu, left homemade muffins outside my door on my birthday, and never failed to ask how my father was doing after his stroke. We were close enough to matter, but careful enough to pretend we did not. Claire was 34, thoughtful, guarded, and far more fragile than she allowed most people to see. She worked as a speech therapist at an elementary school and had an extraordinary ability to make frightened children feel brave. Yet outside the classroom, she often doubted her own worth. Her fiancé, Everett, had left her 18 months before their wedding, telling her she was too emotional, too cautious, and too difficult to love. Those words had settled deep inside her. Since then, she had gone on a handful of dates arranged by friends, returning each time with a polite smile and a hollow look that told me she had spent the evening trying to become smaller so someone else might accept her. I hated seeing that. I also hated the jealousy that tightened in my chest whenever I saw her dressed for someone else. That afternoon, I carried her into my apartment and eased her onto the sofa. The blood on her sleeve came from a shallow scrape near her elbow. Her palm was bruised, her ankle swollen, and her whole body trembled. I knelt in front of her and asked whether she needed a doctor or the police. She shook her head and tried to speak, but the words collapsed into another sob. I brought water, a clean towel, and the first aid kit, then sat near her without touching her until she reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold. She told me the date had begun at a waterfront restaurant with a man named Russell Crane, a successful property developer introduced by a coworker. At first, he had been charming. Then he began mocking the waiter, criticizing Claire's clothes, and asking why a woman her age was still alone. When she tried to leave, he followed her outside, grabbed her wrist, and accused her of wasting his time. Claire had pulled away and fallen against the edge of a stone planter, scraping her arm and twisting her ankle. Several people had turned to look, but no one had moved quickly enough. Russell walked away after telling her she was unstable and would probably be alone forever. She had called a rideshare, but when the car reached our building, she could not make herself go into her apartment. She came to my door instead. As I cleaned the scrape on her arm, anger burned through me, but I kept my voice steady. Claire did not need rage. She needed safety. She needed someone who would believe her without questioning what she had done to provoke him. She needed to hear that his cruelty did not define her. I told her none of what happened was her fault. I told her leaving had been brave. I told her Russell's words were designed to wound, not reveal truth. Claire stared at me with tears gathering again, and then she whispered the sentence that changed everything between us. She said she could not stop thinking about me. The room went completely still. Outside the windows, delivery trucks rolled past in the bright afternoon, children shouted from the sidewalk, and sunlight rested across the floorboards, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Claire looked terrified after saying it, as though she had opened a door she could never close. She explained that during the date, every cruel thing Russell did made her think of the opposite in me. When Russell interrupted her, she remembered how I listened. When he mocked the waiter, she remembered the afternoon I spent repairing a broken chair for the elderly custodian at her school without charging him. When Russell grabbed her, she remembered all the times I had waited for permission before even taking her hand. She said the worst part was realizing she had spent months forcing herself to search for kindness in strangers when the person who made her feel safest lived 10 feet away. For one reckless moment, I wanted to tell her I loved her. The truth had lived inside me for over a year. It was there every time she laughed in the hallway, every time she knocked on my door holding 2 cups of coffee, every time she asked about my father with genuine concern. But Claire had just been frightened and humiliated. Her confession might have come from shock, loneliness, or the desperate need to feel protected. I could not take advantage of that, no matter how deeply I wanted the words to be real. So I told her she mattered too much to me for us to make a decision while she was hurt. Her face fell, and the pain in her expression nearly destroyed my resolve. She tried to pull her hand away, embarrassed, but I held it gently and explained that I was not rejecting her. I was protecting the possibility of us. I wanted whatever happened next to be chosen in peace, not born from fear. Claire nodded, yet a wall rose behind her eyes. She thanked me for helping, and despite her swollen ankle, she insisted on returning to her apartment. I walked her across the hallway, made sure she had ice and pain medicine, and promised to check on her later. When her door closed, I stood there in the bright corridor feeling as though I had done the right thing in the most painful way possible. The following morning, sunlight filled the building, but Claire did not leave for work. I brought breakfast and found her sitting beside the window with her phone in her lap. Russell had sent 6 messages. Some were apologies. Others blamed her for overreacting. The final message warned her not to damage his reputation. Claire's hands shook as she showed me. I urged her to document everything and report the incident. At first she refused, convinced no one would believe that a respected businessman had behaved that way. Then another message appeared from an unknown number. It was from a waitress at the restaurant who had witnessed part of the confrontation. She said Russell had treated another woman similarly months earlier and offered to provide a statement. That message became the first unexpected turn. Claire had believed she was alone, but she was not. With encouragement from the waitress and her school principal, she contacted the police and filed a report. Security footage from the restaurant entrance showed Russell grabbing her wrist and following her when she tried to leave. The evidence did not erase what happened, but it gave Claire something she had lost long before that date: confidence in her own memory. Everett had spent years making her question whether her feelings were reasonable. Russell had tried to do the same in one afternoon. This time, she refused to carry a cruel man's version of her. Over the next week, I helped with practical things. I drove her to work while her ankle healed, carried laundry downstairs, and repaired the broken clasp on the bracelet she had worn during the date. Yet emotionally, she kept her distance. She thanked me politely, never stayed for coffee, and stopped knocking on my door simply to talk. I realized my caution had wounded her more deeply than I intended. She thought I had given her a gentle rejection. I considered explaining everything, but fear stopped me. My last serious relationship had ended after my former partner, Lacey, told me that caring for my father had made my life too complicated. She left during the hardest month of his recovery. Since then, I had convinced myself that loving someone quietly was safer than asking them to stay. Then my father suffered another medical setback. It was not a second stroke, but a sudden infection that left him weak and confused. I drove to the rehabilitation center late one morning and sat beside his bed while doctors adjusted his treatment. Claire learned what happened from my uncle. She arrived before noon carrying a clean shirt, sandwiches, and the crossword puzzle book my father liked. She did not ask whether she should come. She simply came because she knew I would forget to eat and pretend I was not frightened. My father recognized her immediately. His speech was slow, but his smile was clear. He had met Claire several times and liked her more than he tried to hide. While I stepped into the hallway to speak with a nurse, Claire sat beside him. Later, my father told me she had cried quietly and admitted she was afraid she had ruined our friendship by confessing her feelings. He said he told her something I had been too cowardly to say, that I had loved her for a long time, but I mistook fear for patience, that I was embarrassed that he had revealed my heart, yet relieved that someone finally had. When Claire and I walked into the rehabilitation garden that afternoon, the sun was warm and the air smelled of clipped grass and summer flowers. She asked whether what my father said was true. I could no longer hide behind timing or caution. I told her I had fallen in love with her slowly, through ordinary moments. I loved the way she remembered every child's birthday at school, the way she spoke to my father without rushing him, the way she left crumbs on the counter whenever she baked, and the way she tried to appear strong even when she needed someone to remind her she did not have to be. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. I admitted that when she confessed after the terrible date, I wanted to hold her and tell her everything. I stopped because I feared she would later feel trapped by gratitude. I thought I was protecting her, but part of me had also been protecting myself. I was afraid that if she knew how much she mattered, she would eventually decide my life was too complicated and leave, just as Lacey had. Claire listened without interrupting. Then she told me that people like Everett and Russell had taught her to confuse love with judgment, while people like me had shown her that love could look like patience, respect, and presence. Still, she did not want to begin a relationship simply because we had rescued each other from painful days. She wanted us to choose each other when life was ordinary. I agreed. We decided not to rush. There was no dramatic kiss in the garden, no sweeping promise that pain would never return. There was only honesty, sunlight, and two people finally refusing to let fear speak for them. In the weeks that followed, Claire attended counseling through an employee assistance program. She continued cooperating with the investigation into Russell, and another woman came forward after hearing about the complaint. Claire's courage became part of someone else's courage. I began attending a caregiver support group, something I had resisted for months because I believed strength meant carrying everything alone. We started spending time together intentionally. We had breakfast at a small bakery, walked through a coastal park, visited my father, and painted Claire's kitchen on a bright Saturday afternoon. Each day happened in sunlight. Each day felt less like an escape and more like a beginning. Our first kiss came on an ordinary Tuesday at 4 in the afternoon. Claire had returned from therapy looking tired but peaceful. She stood in the hallway between our apartments and said she had spent so long believing love would arrive as excitement that she almost missed the quiet safety of being truly known. I told her safety was not the absence of passion. Sometimes it was the place where passion could finally grow without fear. She smiled, stepped closer, and kissed me with one hand resting against my chest. It was gentle, certain, and worth every moment we had waited. Months later, Russell accepted responsibility through a legal agreement that included mandated counseling and a protective order. It was not a perfect form of justice, but Claire no longer measured her healing by whether he understood the harm he caused. She measured it by the life she reclaimed. She laughed more freely, set clearer boundaries, and stopped apologizing for having needs. I learned to ask for help, to speak before silence became distance, and to trust that love was not a burden placed on someone else. One bright autumn afternoon, my father was discharged to a smaller assisted living community near us. Claire helped arrange books in his new room while I placed photographs on the windowsill. He watched us move around each other with the easy rhythm we had once been too afraid to name. Before we left, he reached for both our hands and said that second chances rarely arrive looking like the past. Sometimes they arrive across the hallway, carrying soup, fixing broken furniture, or knocking on the one door they trust when the world has been cruel. As Claire and I walked home beneath golden trees, she stopped outside our building. She looked up at the windows where our separate lives had unfolded side by side for so long. Then she told me she no longer thought of that terrible date as the day everything fell apart. It was the day she finally stopped running toward people who made her prove her worth and turned toward someone who had always treated her as though her heart was precious. before this story ends, leave a meaningful comment about the person who made you feel safe when life became overwhelming, or share what you believe real love should feel like. Your words may remind someone in our community that kindness is not weakness and that being treated gently is not something anyone should have to earn. A year after Claire collapsed at my door, we stood in the same sunlit hallway surrounded by moving boxes. We were not leaving the building. We were simply giving up one apartment and combining our lives in the other. Claire held the old blue coffee mug she had carried every morning since I first knew her, while I carried the restored wooden table where we had shared countless meals. She glanced at the small distance between our doors and laughed through tears, amazed that we had once believed 10 feet was too far to cross. That I kissed her forehead and reminded her that we crossed it when we were ready. Not perfectly. Not without fear. But honestly. And that was why we lasted. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Claire once believed being left meant she was unlovable, and I once believed silence could protect me from loss. We were both wrong. Love did not save us by erasing our wounds. It saved us by teaching us that the right person would never use those wounds against us. Sometimes hope does not arrive with grand promises. Sometimes it arrives in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, sobbing at your door, finally brave enough to say, "I can't stop thinking about you."